Little girl sat by the checkout in supermarket, just watching people buy food, rich CEO said, one afternoon. The sliding doors of a busy supermarket opened and closed endlessly as customers hurried in and out with their carts full of groceries. Inside, the lines at the checkout counters stretched long, families and workers picking up food for the evening. The air carried the smell of baked bread, coffee from the cafe corner, and the faint sound of announcements over the speakers. Near the very last checkout counter, a little girl sat quietly on the floor. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her small arms wrapped around them. She wore a faded pink dress with tiny flowers printed on it, and her shoes looked old, the soles nearly worn out. Her hair was tied back, but messy, like she had done it herself. Next to her lay a backpack, too big for her size, its zipper half broken. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't hold out her hand or ask for money. She only watched. Her big eyes followed every family unloading groceries onto the conveyor belt: milk, fruits, bread, meat, chips, and cookies. Whenever she saw other children begging their parents for candy or snacks, a shadow of longing flickered across her face. But she remained still, silent, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Most shoppers noticed her, but quickly looked away. Some thought she was waiting for her parents. Others assumed she belonged to someone in the store. No one stopped to ask. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. A child sitting on the floor where she probably didn't belong. But the truth was different. She had been coming to this supermarket almost every afternoon, quietly sitting near the checkout watching. She never caused trouble. She never complained. She just sat there, her stomach empty, her eyes searching. That day, as the crowd grew heavier, a man walked into the supermarket. He looked different from everyone else. His suit was sharp, his shoes polished. And on his wrist was a luxury watch that caught the light. People noticed him, some even whispered. Because he was well known in the city, a rich CEO who owned several businesses. He was respected, admired, and sometimes even envied. He moved with quiet confidence, picking up a basket instead of a cart, and selected only a few items: bottled water, fruit, and a pack of bread. He stood in line like everyone else, patient, his tall frame towering over those in front of him. As he waited, his eyes wandered. And then he noticed her. The little girl by the wall. She wasn't looking at him directly, but he could tell she had been watching the food in people's carts, with a hunger she couldn't hide. The CEO felt something stir inside him. He had seen poverty before, but there was something about the way this child sat so silently, not asking, not begging, just watching. It made him pause. He thought of his own childhood, the times when food had been scarce in his home before his success. A memory he rarely revisited came rushing back. When it was his turn, he placed his items on the belt, but his eyes remained on the girl. The cashier scanned his groceries quickly, and he paid without hesitation. But instead of walking out, he bent down slightly, looked toward the child, and spoke softly. "Why are you sitting here, little one?" he asked. The girl looked up, surprised that someone was speaking to her. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I'm just watching." "Watching what?" the CEO asked gently. "People buying food," she said. Her gaze shifted to a family ahead. Their cart piled high with everything she wished she could have. "I like to see what they choose. I pretend maybe one day I can buy too." The CEO's chest tightened at her words. This wasn't just curiosity. This was hunger mixed with hope, a child too young to carry such weight. He crouched down so that he was at her level. "Where is your mom or dad?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's just me and my little brother. He's at home. I come here because I like to watch." The man stayed silent for a moment, his thoughts heavy. He looked at her small hands folded over her knees, at her thin arms that spoke of skipped meals. In his world of meetings, profits, and deals worth millions, he had almost forgotten what it meant to truly need something as simple as food. He stood up slowly, holding his bag of groceries. Before leaving, he said, almost to himself but loud enough for her to hear, "No child should have to just watch. They should eat." The girl blinked at him, unsure what he meant. She thought he was like the others, someone who noticed but walked away. But when he stepped toward the store entrance, instead of leaving, he paused. He turned back. His eyes still fixed on her, his mind already making a decision that would change both of their lives. The little girl didn't know it yet. But this afternoon would be different from all the others. For the first time, someone had not just seen her. Someone had truly noticed. The automatic doors opened as the CEO stepped out into the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rows of cars. But his mind wasn't on the light or the city beyond. His thoughts remained with the girl inside. He walked a few steps toward his sleek black car, but stopped, his hand hovering over the door handle. Something inside him felt heavy, like a voice refusing to let him drive away. For years, his life had been about numbers, profits, and responsibilities. He was known as decisive, a man who never wasted time second-guessing himself. Yet now, in the middle of a supermarket parking lot, he hesitated. He thought of the girl's thin frame, her whisper about a brother waiting at home, and her eyes. Those wide, patient eyes that carried more than a child should. He turned around and walked back inside. The store was still busy, but he spotted her instantly. She hadn't moved. Still sitting by the checkout as if nothing in the world had changed. But when she noticed him returning, her expression shifted. Confusion. Maybe even a flicker of hope. The CEO walked directly to the cashier. "Can you give me another cart?" he asked. The cashier blinked, surprised. Most people wanted their groceries bagged and ready. Not another round of shopping. But the man's tone left no room for question. He pushed the empty cart toward the aisles, but before he began, he looked at the girl. "Come," he said, his voice calm but firm. The little girl's eyes widened. "Me?" she asked, pointing at herself. "Yes, you," he said. "You're going to help me shop?" She hesitated. No one had ever spoken to her like that. People usually avoided her, or at best, tossed her a glance full of pity. Slowly, she stood up, clutching her backpack, and walked toward him. She looked nervous, unsure if she should follow, but something in his voice made her believe. Together, they walked down the first aisle. He pushed the cart, and she trailed beside him, her small hands brushing the shelves as if she were touching a dream. "What do you like?" he asked. The question startled her. "Min," she whispered again. "Yes, you," he said with a faint smile. "What do you like to eat?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. I don't know." "Then let's find out," he said. He stopped at the cereal section. Rows of colorful boxes stretched endlessly. "Pick one." Her eyes darted nervously across the shelves. She looked like someone standing before treasure but too afraid to claim it. Finally, she raised her small hand and pointed to a box with a cartoon character on the front. "Good choice," he said, placing it into the cart. They moved through the aisles, bread, milk, fruit, pasta, peanut butter, rice, even cookies. Each time he asked her what she liked. Each time she answered hesitantly. As though she wasn't sure she was allowed to choose. By the time they reached the frozen section, the cart was half full. More than she had probably ever seen in her life. The girl finally whispered. "This is too much." He looked at her seriously. "It's not too much. It's what you need." Her lips pressed together. She wanted to argue, to say that no one had ever done this for her before. But the words stuck in her throat. When they reached the checkout counter again, people stared. Whispers moved through the line as they recognized the CEO with the little girl. A cart full of food between them. But he didn't care. He stood tall, placing every item onto the belt. The cashier scanned each one, glancing between the two of them with wide eyes. The girl watched silently, still clutching her backpack, as bag after bag filled. She didn't smile, she didn't cheer. She only stared in disbelief, like she was afraid she might wake up and it would all vanish. Once everything was packed, the CEO carried the bags himself. He turned to her. "Where's your home?" Her eyes lowered, and for a moment, she didn't answer. Then, quietly, she said, "It's not far. Just a few blocks." "Show me," he said. They walked together through the streets. The bags weighed heavily in his hands, but he didn't mind. She walked beside him, glancing up every now and then, still unsure if this was real. After a few minutes, they reached a small, run-down apartment building. The paint was peeling, the steps cracked. She led him up the stairs and to a door with a rusty lock. She pushed it open, and he followed her inside. The apartment was almost bare. A thin mattress lay on the floor. A small boy, no more than 4 years old, sat quietly in the corner with a toy car missing its wheels. His eyes lit up when he saw his sister walk in. The CEO set the bags down, and the little boy ran to them, peeking inside with pure wonder. He pulled out a pack of cookies, hugging it tightly. The girl looked at the CEO, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. He knelt down so he was at her level again. "Children shouldn't just sit and watch other people eat," he said softly. "You deserve more than that." Her eyes filled with tears though she tried to blink them back. She nodded, clutching her brother's hand tightly. The CEO stood, glancing around the small, empty space. His heart felt heavy again. This wasn't just about food. It was about life, about giving them a chance to live with dignity. He knew in that moment that he couldn't simply walk away. And so, the decision he had made in the supermarket grew stronger. This wasn't the end of their meeting. It was only the beginning. 2. The little boy's laughter echoed softly in the dim apartment, as he opened the cookie pack, and offered one to his sister. She shook her head, telling him to eat first, but he pushed it toward her anyway. The CEO stood silently by the doorway, his eyes fixed on the scene. It was such a simple moment. 2 children sharing food. But to him, it felt heavier than anything he had experienced in boardrooms or meetings. He placed the rest of the bags carefully on the small kitchen counter. The kitchen barely looked usable. A cracked sink, an old stove with one working burner, and a small refrigerator that hummed loudly in the corner. He opened the fridge and saw only a half-empty bottle of water and a few slices of bread, hard from age. His chest tightened again. "Do you live here alone?" he asked the girl. She nodded slowly. Since Mom left." The words hung in the air. The CEO looked at her closely. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even emotional when she said it. It was as if she had repeated that sentence so many times in her head, that it had lost its sting. But for him, it carried a weight he couldn't ignore. "And your father?" he asked gently. "Hey, he never came back," she whispered. She looked down, avoiding his eyes, her small hands tugging at her dress. "It's just me and him now," she said, pointing to her brother. The CEO felt something stir deep inside him. A mix of anger at the world and determination he hadn't felt in years. He crouched down again, looking at her seriously. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leela," she answered softly. "And your brother?" "Ethan." He repeated their names silently, committing them to memory. Then he stood, running a hand through his hair. He had built companies, created wealth, signed contracts worth millions. But none of it had ever felt as important as standing in that room, knowing 2 children were surviving on almost nothing. "Lila," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to listen carefully. From today, you and Ethan won't go hungry again." She blinked at him, unsure if she could believe the words. She had heard promises before. Teachers who said help would come, neighbors who said they'd check in. But nothing had changed. "You don't have to just sit in a supermarket and watch other people buy food," he continued. "You deserve to eat, to smile, to be children." Her lips trembled, but she stayed quiet, holding Ethan's hand tightly. The CEO glanced around again. The walls were cracked, the air smelled faintly of dampness. And there was barely any furniture. It wasn't just food they needed. It was stability, care, and a future. He pulled out his phone and stepped toward the window. For a moment, he hesitated. In his world everything was about logic and business. But this was different. This was personal. He dialed a number. "Michael," he said when his assistant picked up, "I need you to send a delivery. Groceries. Essentials. Enough to last a family for a month. And send someone to check the place. Repairs, cleaning, everything. I'll text you the address." Michael was confused but didn't ask questions. The CEO wasn't a man to explain himself. When he hung up, he turned back to the children. Ethan had fallen asleep with the cookie pack beside him, his small head resting on Leela's lap. She stroked his hair gently, her eyes still fixed on the CEO. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. The question cut straight to the point. He could have answered with something vague. Charity, kindness, goodwill. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was deeper. Personal. "When I was young," he said slowly, "I knew what it was like to be hungry. I promised myself if I ever had the chance, I'd never let another child go through it if I could help." Leela's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, she saw him not just as a man in a suit but as someone who understood. She nodded, her throat tight with unspoken emotion. The CEO checked the time. Evening was settling in, the city outside glowing with streetlights. He knew he couldn't stay forever, but leaving felt impossible. These two children had no one else. If he walked away, who would protect them? Finally, he said, "I'll be back tomorrow. You have my word." Leela looked at him carefully, her gaze searching his face for any sign of a broken promise. She had learned the hard way not to trust easily. But something in his voice, steady and sure, made her believe, just a little. When he finally left the apartment, the night air felt heavy. His car waited at the curb, sleek and polished. A stark contrast to the cracked building behind him. He slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. His reflection in the mirror looked different, like a man who had finally remembered what truly mattered. Back in the apartment, Leela tucked Ethan under the thin blanket, her eyes drifting toward the bags of food stacked on the counter. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to whisper words she hadn't dared to hope for. Maybe tomorrow will be better. And as she closed her eyes beside her brother, she clung to the memory of the man who had spoken not with pity, but with promise. What none of them knew yet was that this small act, the decision of a rich CEO to notice a little girl by the supermarket checkout, was about to change the course of all their lives forever. The next morning, the city stirred awake with the hum of traffic and footsteps on sidewalks. But in a quiet corner of the neighborhood, inside a small apartment where life had often been heavy with silence, something was different. The smell of fresh bread and fruit filled the air. Grocery bags, once stacked by the counter, were now open. Boxes of cereal sat proudly on the shelf, milk chilled in the refrigerator, and fruit brightened the small kitchen. Leela woke first. She sat up on the mattress, blinking at the light filtering through the thin curtains. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The fridge humming wasn't empty anymore. There were snacks, bread, and things she had only ever seen other people buy. She stepped quietly across the floor, opened the refrigerator door, and stood there staring. Her little brother Ethan stirred awake and rubbed his eyes. "Leela, is it real?" he mumbled. She turned to him with the faintest smile. "Yes, it's real. We have food now." Ethan hurried to the counter, his tiny fingers reaching for a piece of fruit. He bit into it with pure joy, juice dripping down his chin. Leela laughed softly, a sound that hadn't escaped her lips in a long time. For once, their morning wasn't about waiting for hunger to fade. It was about eating without fear. Meanwhile, across town, the CEO sat in his office, surrounded by the usual weight of business. Papers lined his desk, and his phone buzzed with calls and messages. His assistant, Michael, walked in with a clipboard. "Sir, the delivery was made last night. Groceries, cleaning supplies, even some blankets. And I've scheduled a crew to repair the plumbing and paint the apartment this week." The CEO nodded, his eyes still fixed on the skyline outside the tall glass windows. "Good. Make sure it gets done properly." Michael hesitated, then asked, "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why this family? You've never involved yourself personally in things like this before." The CEO leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "Because I saw myself in that little girl, and I can't ignore it." Michael studied him for a moment, realizing this wasn't just charity, it was personal. He nodded and left quietly. Later that afternoon, true to his word, the CEO returned to the small apartment. He carried with him 2 more bags, not just food this time, but books, crayons, and a small toy car for Ethan. When Leela opened the door and saw him, her eyes widened. She had doubted all morning if he would really come back. Promises had been broken so many times in her life that hope felt dangerous. But here he was, standing tall in the doorway with bags that seemed to hold more than just items. They held his word. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would," he replied, simply stepping inside. Ethan ran to him immediately, his small hands reaching for the bag. The CEO laughed, crouched down, and handed him the toy car. "This one's for you." The boy's eyes lit up, and he rolled the car across the floor instantly, laughter filling the room. Leela watched quietly, her hands folded. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small compared to what he had done. Instead, she asked, Why are you helping us? He paused, placing the books on the counter. Because no child should feel invisible. And no child should ever sit in a supermarket just to watch other people eat. Her throat tightened. She turned her head slightly so he wouldn't see the tears forming in her eyes. She didn't want him to think she was weak. The CEO sat down on the small wooden chair near the counter. Tell me about your school, Leela. Do you go? She shook her head slowly. I used to. But after Mom left, I had to stay with Ethan. I couldn't leave him alone. Sometimes I try to teach him letters from old books. The CEO's heart sank. A child sacrificing her education to protect her brother. He had built companies with some of the sharpest minds. Yet here was a little girl who had given up her chance to learn just to keep her family together. He made another decision right there. Tomorrow. I'll arrange something. You deserve to be in school, and Ethan deserves care. You won't do this alone anymore. Leela looked at him sharply, panic in her eyes. No, please! Don't take Ethan away. We can't be separated. He raised his hand gently. I'm not taking him away. I'm saying you'll both be looked after. Together, do you trust me? The question hung in the air. Trust was a dangerous thing for her. But as she looked into his eyes, steady and kind, she saw no hint of pity or deceit. Slowly, she nodded. For the next hour, the CEO stayed with them. He showed Ethan how to build tracks for the toy car using empty boxes. And he listened as Leela nervously read from one of the books he had brought. Her voice was shaky at first, but with each sentence, her confidence grew. He corrected her gently when she stumbled, encouraging her with patience that felt almost fatherly. When it was time for him to leave, Ethan clung to his leg. Will you come back again? The boy asked. The CEO smiled and patted his head. Yes, tomorrow and the day after. As long as you need me. Leela stood by the door, watching him go. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing: the man who had stopped at the supermarket checkout wasn't just passing through their lives. He was becoming part of it. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, Leela whispered, things are going to change. I can feel it. Ethan yawned, holding the toy car close. Because of him. Yes, she said softly. Because of him. And as sleep carried them both into dreams, the CEO sat in his office once more. Looking out at the city lights. He had spent years building an empire, but now for the first time, he felt like he was building something far more important. Hope in the hearts of two children who had once been forgotten. The next morning, the air was cooler. The sky a pale shade of blue streaked with light. In the small apartment, Leela woke early, the sound of her brother's quiet breathing beside her filling the silence. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the heavy knot of worry about where food would come from. The groceries stacked neatly in the kitchen reminded her that today would be different. She pulled on her faded dress, and tied her hair back quickly. When she stepped into the kitchen, she paused, staring again at the refrigerator filled with milk and fruit, the shelf lined with cereal boxes. It still felt unreal. Ethan stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. Lila, do we still have the bread? He asked. She smiled and nodded. We have plenty now. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Leela froze for a moment, her heart racing. Knocks usually meant trouble. Landlords asking for rent, strangers asking questions, neighbors with complaints. But when she opened the door, relief washed over her. It was him, the CEO, dressed as sharply as before. But this time with something softer in his eyes. He carried a folder in one hand and a small bag in the other. You're early, Leela whispered, half smiling. I thought we could talk. He replied gently. And I brought something for Ethan. Ethan peeked from behind his sister. His small face lighting up when the man handed him a box of building blocks. He rushed to the floor, opening it instantly, his laughter filling the room. The CEO stepped inside and sat on the same wooden chair by the counter. He placed the folder on the table. Lila, he said, his tone steady. I've made arrangements. Tomorrow you'll be enrolled back in school. And Ethan will attend a daycare program nearby. You don't have to miss your education to protect him anymore. Both of you will be safe. Leela's eyes widened. The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long her world had been small, this apartment, the supermarket, her brother. School had become a dream she pushed aside. School, she whispered, as though the word itself was fragile. Yes, he said firmly. You deserve to learn, you're bright, Leela. You shouldn't have to give up your future just to survive. She shook her head slightly, tears pricking her eyes. But, we don't have money. We don't even have clothes for school. He slid the folder toward her. That's taken care of. Uniforms, supplies, tuition, it's all arranged. Her lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but the words were stuck. She glanced at Ethan, who was building towers with the blocks, his laughter echoing like music. For the first time, she saw a future where they both could be children, not survivors. Slowly, she whispered. Why us? The CEO leaned forward, his voice low but strong. Because someone once helped me when I was a boy. I promised myself I would do the same if I ever could. And when I saw you sitting there at the supermarket, I knew it was time to keep that promise. Leela's eyes overflowed. She tried to wipe the tears quickly, embarrassed, but he shook his head gently. Don't hide them. They're proof you're strong enough to hope again. The room grew quiet, the weight of his words filling the space. Ethan looked up, holding a block in each hand, and said with childlike innocence, Are you going to stay with us forever? The CEO's chest tightened. He hadn't thought that far yet, but he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away. I'll always be here when you need me, he said softly. Over the next few days, everything began to change. The apartment was cleaned and repaired, fresh paint covering the cracked walls. New curtains replaced the old torn ones. And a small table with chairs was brought in so they could eat together properly. On Monday morning, Leela put on her new school uniform for the first time. She stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her hair was neatly tied back, her shoes polished. Her books packed carefully in a backpack that actually fit her. Ethan hugged his small lunchbox tightly, ready for daycare. As they stepped outside, the CEO was waiting by his car. He smiled when he saw them. Ready? Leela nodded, nervous but excited. He drove them to their destinations himself. When they arrived at the school, children hurried past, their laughter echoing across the yard. Leela hesitated, clutching her bag. The CEO knelt beside her. You belong here, he said gently. Don't ever forget that. She took a deep breath, then walked through the gates, her heart racing with both fear and hope. Days turned into weeks and slowly, life transformed. Leela excelled in her studies, her teachers praising her dedication. Ethan thrived in daycare, his laughter growing louder each day. Their home became warmer, filled with not just food and comfort, but something they had never known before. Stability. The CEO visited often, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just to sit and listen. He became more than a stranger, more than a helper. He became a part of their story. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Leela sat at the table doing her homework while Ethan played with his toy car on the floor. The CEO watched quietly, a rare softness in his eyes. He realized then that all his wealth, all his achievements, had never given him what this moment did. The peace of knowing he had made a difference. Leela looked up from her book and smiled at him. Thank you for seeing me that day. No one else ever did. He felt his throat tighten but managed a small smile. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. And in that quiet apartment, with two children who had once been invisible to the world, he found something richer than all the money he had ever earned. Family, hope, and love. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. Leela was just a little girl sitting by the checkout, invisible to most. But one man's choice to stop, to notice, rewrote her story. Imagine how many lives we could change if we all chose kindness today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire hope and compassion. Your support helps us keep sharing these messages with the world. Thank you for giving your precious time to this story. Stay kind, stay hopeful. And remember, your kindness could be the reason someone believes in tomorrow.